morning and welcome back to the Ninja Chickens channel. You can find me on Instagram as ninja.chickens and on Ravelry as Ninja Chickens and through the Ninja Chickens website, ninja.chickens.org. My name's Maria and I'll be your host today. It has been a month since my last podcast because many of you know I've been traveling the world and it's been amazing. I have lots to tell you about. But my plan is to go, since I know most of you are here for the knitting and fibery things, to go over a lot of the knitting related stuff first, and then I will chat about my travels afterwards. It is 8:30 in the morning, Sunday morning, and I decided to get out here early because it is cool and beautiful. There was so much heat and humidity during travels, and then we came back to a heat wave. And so it's really nice to be outside right now while it's cool. Cool enough to wear a shawl. And it's been raining for the last 2 days, so everything is green and lush. You can see one of the gardens behind me is completely covered in weeds when I got home, so I spent a couple of days just pulling weeds everywhere, and I still have another garden to pull weeds in. But it's looking beautiful right now. So I got you some flowers from the farmer's market. Check out these flowers. Look at that sunflower. I told Leaf we have to grow these next year because those are the coolest looking sunflowers. They remind me of lion's manes. All right, well, let's get into it. I really did very little knitting in the past month because things were so busy with travel. When there was any downtime, I was either just trying to put my feet up and relax and not think about anything, even knitting, or the kids were relaxing and my husband and I were planning our next moves and figuring out where we were going to go and stuff. So there just wasn't a lot of knitting time. On the ride back, on the flight back, I was able to get a lot of knitting done, and this is my first finished object. This is something that you guys saw many months ago. I had 2 eco-printed sock blanks that I just thought looked really pretty together, and I wanted to make a cowl. So what I did was cast it on in a circle and made a tube. So this can be worn, you know, in whatever fashion you want. And let me show you. It's super squishy and soft, and I like it. When I was knitting it, it reminded me of Dr. Seuss, the Cat in the Hat's hat, but luckily I don't think it turned out looking like that. But it's, you know, big enough. You can wear it around your head. So yeah, I will probably put out a pattern for this. It's really simple, but if anyone feels like test knitting it, it'd be nice to have someone else looking over the pattern just to make sure everything is understandable. You can see in here, let me pull up the splotches of cochineal. And the red is madder dyed, but you can see the stripes in there, and those stripes are from different plant materials. And that's how a lot of these sock blanks end up turning out. You'll get either speckles or stripes depending on how the plant was placed on there. There we go. So yeah, I really like this one. It was fun and easy to knit because you just keep going in a round, and it's all stockinette stitch because it's in a circle. My other finished object I just cast off late last night. And I had left this at home because I didn't want to bring this big thing on the trip with me. And I just had one arm to go. So this is Kaya's sweater. There's a lot of clouds out today, and I have some things up to try and block the sun, but it's making it hard to see the true colors. There we go. So yeah, this is, it's called the Warm Me Up, the Warm You Up sweater by Ririko. And the original sweater has cables down the arms and colorwork along the bottom hem. Kaya liked the drape of the sweater and how it was how it would hang on her, but she didn't want anything other than 3 stripes, pastel stripes. So I did that for her. I feel like the bottom color is, though it's the same length as the top 2 colors, because of the ribbing, it looks too short. So I'm going to block it and see how it looks on her, and if it still looks that way, I may rip the ribbing out and knit a few more inches on the bottom color. But I haven't even blocked it. I will have pictures of this, hopefully, on her with the next episode. So for that, I used Quince & Company. It was their chickadee base. And I liked it. I think it may have been the first time I've worked with Quince & Company's chickadee. And it was super soft. And it had all the pastel colors that she wanted. So that was important. So the 2 works in progress that I have are the 2 other things that I brought on the trip with me. And you haven't seen either of these before, unless you were looking on Instagram. I cast them on right before the trip, so I had some simple knits. This is a pair of socks for Leaf in crazy pink and green and yellow. And here, so this is the yarn. It is by Pearl's Yarn Emporium, which is a local yarn store, and it's their Who's sock base. There's a number to it. I can't remember the number. I'll put it in the notes. They have a few sock yarns that they've dyed, and it seems like a standard sock mix, but it feels really sturdy. It feels a lot woolier than your standard merino nylon. Leaf gave this to me for Mother's Day last year, and it's not the standard type of yarn that I would use, but he picked it out and it's so colorful. I asked him if he wanted some socks in this, and he said yes. So what I'm doing is I've just knit the pattern on the front, and I'm going to knit it past where I put in his heel, and then I'll knit the pattern on both sides. And I'm going to do an afterthought heel because I want to use as much of this as possible. Probably make them knee socks for him because he said he wants knee socks if I could. Use every bit of it and then add in a white heel or a yellow heel or a red heel or something like that at the end. But the basic pattern is a slip stitch pattern. It's called Solid Stitch Lines by La Maison de Saba. And originally she did it in 2 different colors, where the row where you would slip the stitch was a separate color. And it's a really cool looking pattern. I may follow that pattern just like that. But what I did is just took the basic idea and did it all in one color. So those are Leaf socks. And then I have another pair of socks from me. And these socks, I took the basic pattern from the Butterfly Socks pattern by Doris Lowman. And I'm using a yarn from Prado de Lana that's from Felicity, their sheep Felicity. It's a Romney. And I took the butterfly idea and just put it on the sock, and once I get to my heel turn, after that I'll do it all the way around also. Here the pattern's just on the top. And you can see if you look really close that right here, I think I'd picked it up after a few weeks and just kind of went on what I thought it was, and I missed some plain stockinette stitches, but it's not really that obvious, so I'm just going to leave it that way. What I think I'm going to do with these is when they're done, I'm going to dip them in a fresh indigo vat. I'm going to harvest everything that I've got around here. I harvested some last year, and I have some a local cousin to indigo that supposedly puts out some blue, just not as much as your standard Japanese indigo. And I'm going to try and harvest that also and see if I can't pull some color from it. I had a really, really big patch of it growing and some Japanese indigo growing. And unfortunately, the house, the people who are the house sitters mowed it over. So it will regrow, but I don't have that really big July harvest that I'm going to have. But I have some in the freezer, and I'm going to make that fresh vat. It's an ice vat is what it's called, and then dip these in there. I think that'll look really cool. Felicity is a really nice yarn. It's definitely sturdy feeling, and Romney is just a sturdy yarn, and it's I guess it's one of those that they call a workhorse yarn. So I'm not really concerned about this just being 100% Romney. I think it's going to last really well as a sock yarn. But I will let you know how that is. And that's the Prado de Lana sock yarn. And that's it. That's my works in progress and my finished objects. Those 4 things, that's what I've been working on this past month. I had thought that I would finish up the socks and everything I brought and have to go out to a yarn store and get more yarn because I just have nothing but knitting time, but I was running around doing all kinds of traveling and I didn't get to a single yarn store when I was there. So, and you know, where we were in France, in the small town of Roussillon, there wasn't any yarn store and there wasn't really anything around that I could find. And when we were in Rome, there were some yarn stores, but what I wanted was local stuff, farm produced stuff that I couldn't get anywhere else. And they just didn't have that. So I didn't end up getting much yarn. I'll tell you about the yarn that I did get in just a second. I want to finish up with the knitting stuff. So things that are going on in the knitting world. I did draw a winner from last episode. I'd shown you the Our Maker Life magazine that I was in that was released last month, and did a random.org pick of all the comments from last episode, and the winner was Knitting Mama of 7. And the magazine is already on its way to her. So thank you all for your comments. It was actually really fun to read the comments coming in as I was traveling and continue to feel connected with you guys. So I appreciate that. The other things that are going on is also the Not Everyone Goes to Rhinebeck Knit Along has started. It started July 1st. So what this is, in case you're new here, is Rhinebeck, or the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, is one of the biggies in the world, and a lot of people want to go there, and it's a big deal for a lot of people to get there and hang out with their people and see all the yarn and eat apple cider donuts. And I've never been. It always falls about the weekend before the big festival in Asheville, and I usually help out with that one, so it's hard to get there and back in time. And it also falls during a really busy time of the year here. So unfortunately, I haven't been, and I really do want to someday, but I'm not going this year. So it was the brainchild of Natalie from Remembrances Pottery to have a Not Everybody Goes to Rhinebeck release. That way, those people who don't get to participate in going can celebrate that weekend anyway. So we're having people do their Rhinebeck sweaters before they go, so we're having a not going to Rhinebeck sweater knit along, and we're going to have, gosh, I don't know how many people there are now. It seems like up in the 30s of vendors, potters, knitters, designers, indie dyers, stitch markers, makers, all that kind of stuff, who are going to be having releases and sales and things going on the weekend of Rhinebeck. And that way those people who don't go get to participate in a little bit of the fun anyway. So the knit along just started, and it's to knit a sweater, full-size sweater for yourself. If your child knits and wants to knit one for themselves, that's fine too. It doesn't have to be a full-size adult sweater as long as you're knitting it for yourself. And whips are included. And it goes through November 1st. So you have time to knit during the weekend also. You don't have to have it finished by then. And there's going to be prizes and stuff. Tiny Human Knits has opened a Ravelry group, or opened a Ravelry thread in her group to host all the details. So if you go to Tiny Human Knits, you will find all the details of the knit along if you want to join. There's lots of time to pick your sweater and join in and share in the fun of knitting your sweater for Rhinebeck, even if you don't go. And it gets you a sweater for winter. I still don't know what I'm going to do. I've had the Humulus on my list since it came out, and I really love the look of it, so I might go for that. I need to look in my stash and see what yarn I have. I don't think I have a sweater's quantity worth, so I'll have to figure that out and see what I can create. I'll put a link here also of another vendor, Ann Tudor, who has put up everybody's profile on her website so you can see who's participating in the Not Everybody Goes to Rhinebeck festival. It's a very long name. If you look under hashtag not Rhinebeck 2018 on Instagram, you'll see pictures of people who are participating too. So all of that's going on, which is going to be a lot of fun. And I've got actually in my Ravelry group a link to the details also. It's just that most of it's being carried out through Tiny Humans. So there you go. Oh, and speaking of sweaters, I did get a lovely new design from Victoria Zakhanowicz, who is also a podcaster and a fairly new designer who put out, I think it's her first sweater. It's under Devixta Designs, and it's called the Potluck Pullover, and I wanted to show you a picture of it. And she specifically says it's a very simple design that's great for first-time sweater knitters. So if you've never knit a sweater and you want to participate in it along, this one might be a nice one for you. But basically, it's using, leftovers or minis or things to put together a fun striped sweater. And you don't have, you could use 1 or 2 colors if you wanted. And it's short sleeves, which is nice for those of you who live in warmer areas during the winter. So anyway, it's called the Potluck Pullover. And she has offered to give one away to you guys. So I'm going to open that up right now. And that way, if someone wants this for their Rhinebeck knit along, then you can have it. If you will, I'll open a thread in the Ravelry group specifically for this so you guys can go in, and I'll close it before the next episode. So you'll have 2 weeks to enter, and I'll have a question or something fun for you. So yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. I think this is a really cute sweater. So, and congratulations on your release. Let's see. What other goodies do I have for you? I did get my latest issue of No Serial Number magazine. And you guys know how much I love this. I rave every time I get an issue. It's not specifically fiber or knitting, but there's almost always something related to knitting or natural dyeing or eco-printing in here. It's definitely crafty related, but sustainable crafting and conscious crafting. And I love that about this magazine. There's also something just about the feel of it and the pictures. It's just really beautiful. But this one talks about making your own ink from oat galls. It talks about pottery of the Anasazi. And yeah, here's the oat gall one. I think that's really cool. And there's lots of other things. So I haven't had a chance to dig through all of it. Here's one, crocheting your own scrappy blanket. But if you're interested in sustainable crafting, I would recommend getting just one issue to take a look at it, because I got their eco-print issue and thought that was the only one I was going to get. And since then, I've bought every single issue because it's really good. I enjoy it. I enjoy the look and the feel and what they have in it. It doesn't feel like a magazine that's selling you something, if that makes sense. It feels like an educational magazine. So I really like it. How is your plastic free going for those of you who are joining? I will admit, it was really, really hard while I was traveling. Mostly it just gave me a good view of how much plastic is used in the world. So if you didn't see the last episode, I made the commitment to try and go plastic free, because there's just too much plastic in our oceans, in our world, and there's ways around it for many things. Some things there just aren't, that things were created because there was plastic available. Like, our medical system would not be where it is today if we had not invented plastic. And our technology would not be around if we had not invented plastic. But there are some things that I can do without, especially those single-use plastics like grocery bags or produce that's wrapped in plastic. So I'm trying my best to get rid of that. And if you want to hear the rant, you can go to the last episode. But a few of the things that I did, I'll show you. I took Tupperwares that I already had, and I weighed them. And I marked on the tops how much they weighed. And now when I bring them to the grocery store, I can put bulk foods or other things in them and not use those bags. It was hard in the cheese section because all the cheeses are pre-cut and wrapped in plastic. Although the man who manages the cheese section of my grocery store said, we get our cheeses in on these 2 days, we cut them the next day. If you want to come in, just give me a call. I can cut them and put them directly in your Tupperware, which is super sweet. In the meat section, I thought I'd really, beat the system. I would bring in a bunch of big Tupperwares and have them put them in the Tupperwares and just freeze them that way. And I could reuse the Tupperware instead of having them wrapped in all this plastic and then just throw that plastic away. But yesterday, actually, when I was doing a grocery shopping, I brought all my Tupperwares in and I watched how he was gathering them. And some of the people who were there put on gloves, plastic gloves, and they grab the meat you want and they put it in the Tupperware and they wear the same gloves. And then they throw the gloves away after, so it's just one pair of gloves. The man that I was getting the meat from yesterday would take a plastic bag instead of a glove, grab the meat, put it in the Tupperware, take the plastic bag and throw it away because that was the bag he would have used to put the meat in. So it didn't save anything because he used a new plastic bag every time he put a different meat in the Tupperware. So I'm still trying to figure that one out. But, if I can go during the time when those guys only use one pair of gloves, that'd be cool. But for bulk stuff, it's great. For produce, I've gotten these things. I ordered a bunch of simple muslin bags and washed them really well. And I'm actually thinking I might eco-print a bunch and maybe put some of them in the store because that would be fun. And what I'll do is eco-print them with things that are food friendly, not use alum. Maybe I'll do like soy milk or something like that. But they're just cotton muslin and it's great for, I could throw a bunch of apples in here. I could put some broccoli in here. And then I have some that are about twice or even 3 times as big for, a big bunch of kale or something like that. So that's been really helpful. That's actually saved a lot of plastic for me because the produce otherwise was completely wrapped. Everything would go into plastic bags. And yesterday morning, Leaf and I went to the farmer's market and they were all about it when I would take out my bags and put the produce in. They were really excited not to have someone using the plastic bags instead of these. So that was really cool. I also ordered these from a local Etsy seller and they're super cute. I will put her name down below so you have them. She makes these. It's just cotton muslin, and then she dips them in beeswax, and they're like sandwich and snack baggies. And she sent me this one and one with an apple on it. So these would be great for lunch snack things. Of course, they're stiff. It's not the same thing I'm used to, but, I'll get over it. They're cute. They're usable. You can't really put meat stuff in here. Like you wouldn't want to put a sandwich with meat because if you wash this with hot water, the beeswax is going to melt. So it needs to be a dry snack or something that you can easily wipe off. And then she sent me 2 bigger ones too. This one has a bee on it. And another little flap, and then just a plain one. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that these are things that people can make themselves. It's just beeswax, and if you're vegan, there are other options that I've actually seen on the internet for using a different type of food-approved type of wax to create these. And it might not be something that you want to use all the time, but it's kind of a fun novelty and might be fun to, if you have kids, might be fun to make together. So I'm going to try using these more when lunchbox time is back in season. And then the last thing that I got that I was super excited about is my husband brought up the packaging, the fact that a lot of the packaging that people use when they're sending things in their businesses is plastic. And I already use a recyclable and reusable packaging envelope for sending out my sock blanks, but the tape is plastic. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. You just can't find anything that doesn't have something that doesn't have plastic in it. So I went to the place where I get my packaging. It's called Eco Enclose, and I found this. It's plant-derived, biodegradable, renewable tape. So I'm super excited to give this a try and see how it works. It feels like it'll work great. And really, it's just for putting your labels on because I print them out on paper and then I can tape them on. But yeah, so if you do a lot of mailing, Eco Enclose is the name of the company, and they have a really large selection of mailing possibilities that are more sustainable or earth friendly. So I think that's it related to the plastic. Traveling, it was just hard. Everywhere you go around that area, just traveling at the airport, when you're going into grocery stores, it's just hard to do because you can't bring along all your Tupperware and your bags and all that stuff. So we tried our best, and we tried not to get the things that were completely wrapped in plastic, but sometimes we just did. And if we could reuse the bags, we did. But traveling, we had an amazing time. We went first, my daughter and I went to France. It was a school trip. And by school trip, there were 5 kids and 4 of the parents came. So anyway, this trip was arranged through her school. And we went to a place in Provence called Roussillon, which is a really small town in the middle of a bunch of other small towns in the middle of this most beautiful area. So we explored the little towns of Lacoste and Bonnieux, and we went to the bigger town of Arles. We explored around a bunch, and I spent as much time in the lavender fields as I could. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Of course, there were times when the kids were exhausted and we had to cut back on what we were doing, or the parents were getting cranky. I mean, there's always dealing with different people's personalities, but we really had a fun time. We stayed at a suite. It was called a gîte, which is kind of like an Airbnb. It was the first one in the area of Roussillon, and it's called Pottery de Preux. And it was just the sweetest place. They had big gardens. It was right next to some ochre canyons. And so if you don't know anything about the area of Roussillon, it is known for its ochre. This area in particular has a history of millions of years of, oceans and sediment and minerals and all that stuff forming these amazing ochre deposits. And the ochre has been used for many, many years, thousands of years, as paint and pigment coloring. You'll find some very orange, some that's pale, somewhat yellowish, somewhat reddish. And yes, I did get some ochre while I was over there so I could experiment. I specifically got some for my mother-in-law because she is an artist and I think she would love having this raw material and creating paints with it. But it was just beautiful. There were, you'd look and there's just this mountain of orange. And really, the carving in the canyons and the caves in that ochre is man-made because of all the years that people have been taking a little bit more and taking a little bit more. So it's not like natural canyons like going to Zion National Park or somewhere where you see this nature-made thing. A lot of that stuff was man-made, but it was still absolutely beautiful. And we went on this tour of an old ochre museum that talked about how the ochre was developed and the different pigments that could be made, and also actually had a feature on indigo, which was really cool. But one thing that it talked about was those people who would work in the ochre mines and that dust that they would inhale. And it made me think of working in the coal mines, that, every day they'd be inhaling this dust and it would end up coating their lungs, and that it would end up killing them because of the way the ochre was mined. And the people who worked in, by the ovens or the ochre processing spaces. And there's a woman actually who recently did an interview with a man who used to work in the ochre mines and then did an art installation. And part of what she did, it was set up at the ochre museum, was she had all these bags out of different types of ochre, and all along the wall she had their work outfits, like white work outfits that had been coated in different colors of ochre. And then she took silk and dipped them in ochre. And I think she coated them with beeswax afterwards so they would stiffen a little bit to show what their lungs might have looked like. And it was really intense to see that because, you think about all the beautiful things that come out of these paints and all the art, but then forget what went into creating them, especially when we didn't know any better. Now they're not processed like that. Now there's safety regulations to make sure that it's not inhaled. But, back in the day, that's how it went. So I took some pictures, and I'll have that up there so you can see. It was pretty amazing. Of course, there was also a lot of pottery in this area, so that the place that we were staying actually had a potter, and Kaya and the other students got to take some pottery classes, including harvesting from one of the local streams their own clays, and from start to finish creating pottery, which was really cool. We went also to the Gorges, which was this amazing area that had water like I've never seen before. I've seen it in pictures, but it was the most crystal blue-green water. And I think it was partly because of the limestone that was in the mountains, but it was just beautiful. We spent the day just floating around on the lake. And it was the moms in one boat and then the kids in other boats, and that way they could do their thing and go explore. And that was lovely. It was a needed break after many days of running around and exploring. And we found out pretty quickly that there's a big difference in schedules for the French and Italian than there are for the Americans. Whereas we kind of start at 8 a.m. and just keep going. There is always a break, usually between 12 and 2, it seemed like, where we were. Or, yeah, it was usually around 12 to 2, sometimes up to 4, where things would just close. And so you had to make sure you planned your lunch at the right time. And often the restaurants would close until about 7 p.m. when they would open for dinner. And in the States, a lot of people eat dinner 5:30 or 6. So when the kids were hungry, nothing was open. So we quickly learned to make sure we had snacks or had a big lunch so that we were ready for dinner at 7. Yeah, so it was, I'm still processing. It's like when you go to a yarn festival and you come back and it feels like it takes a while to kind of absorb all of it. It's like another world. The thing that was most important to me for going to Provence is I've had on my list, my bucket list for my lifetime, that I wanted to see the lavender fields in Provence. And lavender, it's not that it is the most amazing smell to me. I think there are smells that I like better, or that it tastes the most delicious. It's got an interesting taste. But for me, it has the history of being the first essential oil that I ever used, the first medicine that I ever made, and tinctures and salves and lavender-infused honey. It was the first plant that I experimented with. And it just holds many years of happy memories of things that I've created with it, or, smelling it and the way it makes me feel. So I have always wanted to go to lavender fields, and I spent a lot of time there. I went to go see a bunch of distilleries that process lavender oil, essential oil, that make lavender soaps and lotions and all kinds of stuff. And I went on some walks. One day I went out by myself, and I drove about an hour from where we were. And I went to this area that had what was called the Lavender Walk in Sault, I think is how it's pronounced, Sault. And no one was there. The lavender fields weren't really in full bloom yet in this area. It was a little farther north, so they were just starting to get some purple color to them. So I found what was supposed to be the starting point and met a woman who spoke a little bit of English. And she said, basically, this isn't really the starting point. That's over there up the hill where you need to park your car, but don't park there because we've had a robber. So you can stay here. And I was like, okay. And I asked her, is it safe then to walk by myself if someone's robbing? She's like, yeah, he's just robbing the cars. So I parked my car with her, and she pointed to where the first sign was, because there was supposed to be a bunch of marked signs. I think it was a 2-mile walk. There were supposed to be some marked signs in English and in French that you could read along the way. So I went and found the first sign. It was totally just in French. But there were pictures, so I got to understand some of it. But I don't speak French. I speak more now than I did before, because I learned a little while I was there. But I was able to understand the signs. So I read the first sign, and I had a really simple map that I'd printed off from the internet. And it didn't really have a lot of details on it, but that's all I could find. And then I looked around and no one's there, and there's just big open streets, and there's no sign of where the next sign would be. So I tried to figure it out on my map and thought, okay, I'm here by myself. I'll just go in one direction far enough that if I don't see anything, I can turn around and drive home. But I really didn't want to drive home because I didn't know if I'd ever get out to that area again, and I wanted to see the tour. So I went in one direction and figured out after a little while that I was going the right way. And gosh, maybe 3 hours later, had found the signs and made the loop, maybe hiked up to the top of a mountain that I wasn't supposed to go to, hiked back down, sat and had lunch in one of the lavender fields, found my phone was missing and thought, oh gosh, please tell me I didn't drop it somewhere on this walk because I'll never find it again. And luckily it was in my car. I just, it fell out when I thought I'd put it in my backpack. But it was really amazing, just all by myself. I'd met up with one other person walking at the time. And that's how I knew I was going the wrong way when I went up the mountain, because he wasn't following me anymore. So I turned back around. But it was so cool. And then I had some extra time that day. I thought it was going to be a full day thing. So I ended up, as I was driving home, I was maybe 10 minutes away from this walking tour area, and I passed a sign that talked about a distillery. And I'd been to a few already, but hadn't really seen what I wanted to see. Either they weren't giving tours at the time, or it wasn't, the back rooms weren't open, or something like that. So I thought, what'll it hurt? I have some time this afternoon. Let me turn around and go see if I can find that distillery. And it ended up being the most amazing place. They had a massive room of stuff that they've created. They had their own line of all different types of essential oils, because they didn't just do lavender. They did thyme and marjoram and rosemary and clary sage and all these other plants. When it wasn't lavender season, they were always using it for other herbs and creating different essential oils, which was awesome. They also did tours in English, and we're about to start one. She said, you've got 1 hour for your tour in English. Maybe have a snack before then. And I looked over to the side, and they were making crepes with lavender and honey and lavender tea and all kinds of stuff. So I sat and had myself a little snack. And for those of you who know, I generally eat a ketogenic diet. So I had not had grains or sweets or any of that stuff in about 2.5 years. But I had a lavender honey crepe, and it was really, really good. I mean, I was in France, I've done that before in my life where I was eating a certain diet and I refused something. When I was 19, I was in Mexico studying marine biology, and the men who were helping us with the boats when we would go out, it was a very small town. It was all locals. The people who were helping us didn't speak a lick of English. So this man who was who was basically driving the boat that we were on, threw out a line, didn't have a fishing pole, threw out a line, reeled in a mahi-mahi fish with his fingers. He basically just had a hook and a line and fished it for us and said, I'm going to make you guys something for dinner. And he created this soup, like this stew soup recipe that was his mother's and grandmother's recipe. And I was like, no thanks, I'm a vegetarian. And now I think to myself, I will never have an opportunity to taste something like that. And I wish I'd tasted it, but I didn't. So when I get the opportunity to do stuff unless it's like a life-threatening thing, and having one crepe with lavender honey is not a life-threatening thing for me, when I have that opportunity, I try and take it, especially when you're in a foreign place you may never get to again. So it was really good. And I had some tea, and I had some fresh apricot juice, I think. And then I took the tour, and they were at that moment distilling thyme. So you could smell it in the air. The whole air smelled like thyme. And she showed how the essential oil was taken off of the distillation, and all of that stuff. Is really cool. And then they could tell that I was super excited about it. They told me, usually it's for kids, but if you want to go on this, there's a little walk around the property. So they gave me this cute little map that had like guessing games and stuff and crossword puzzles for kids. And I walked around their whole property, walking through the rosemary and the lavender and the thyme and all the other stuff that they grow there. And it was just amazing. Like, that was what I was looking for on this trip. And I found it. So I was very excited. So yes, oh, one thing I did get, I got so much lavender stuff. I mean, you know, I had saved up my money so I could get, you know, make sure I came home with the things that I really wanted. And I got, like I said, the ochre and one bowl of pottery for drinking tea, because they didn't drink from mugs. They just drank from bowls, which was really cool. And I got olive oils. And when we were in Italy, I got a truffle olive oil, which was really cool. But for lavender, I got different types of essential oils because there's different grades of lavender. I got lavender sachets, some of which I got for you. So this will be part of a giveaway. There's 3 little sachets in here, and I thought these are perfect for sticking in your yarn stash to help keep the moths away. So I got some of these for you, and they're just filled with lavender. And I got a book on lavender. And, you know, part of this was just simply so that I could have those memories of places that I went, because I went to a lot of these to see the lavender. Let me show you this one. There was an abbey that I went to that is still a working monastery, and they grow lavender there. Look at that. Isn't that stunning? We toured the abbey, and the lavender was not yet in full bloom like that, but I have some beautiful pictures of it, so I'll show you those. And some of the distilleries and how, where am I going? That way. The old stills that you'll see. So I got this for myself. And I got this. Secrets and Remedies of the Herbs of Provence, which I am discovering, or I discovered while I was there. Many of the herbs that grow there grow really well here. So I saw a lot of the plants that I knew. I mean, it's a warmer climate, definitely, but still, rosemary, verbena, myrtle, hyssop, basil, all of those things, I've got a lot of those in my garden, so I thought it would be fun to see what secrets and recipes they had in here that are different from the things that I've learned. And I also got this. It looks like a little pillow, but it's completely stuffed with lavender. Whenever I make my bed in the morning, I've been sticking this under the covers on my pillow and then pulling the covers up. And so when I go to bed at night, it smells like lavender. I couldn't help myself. When you're in a place where there's so much lavender, I mean, it was like 7 pounds, $8 or $9. With this much lavender would cost you $20 or $30 just to buy the lavender here. So I got this, and the sunflowers and the lavender and the olives, it all has such lovely memories. Yeah, the olives. So the things we saw everywhere in France. Figs. Growing out of any crack where they could find soil. On walls and anywhere. Like, it takes me serious effort to get my 2 little fig plants to grow. Every year I have to trim them back and cover them with insulation so they don't die in the winter, and often they don't produce anything because it's not warm enough. They were everywhere, which is really cool. Lavender, of course, was everywhere. Olive trees, everywhere. I hadn't thought about that. Like, I knew that olive oil was produced in France, but I always think of it as Spain and Italy. They were everywhere. And I went to 5 minutes from the place where we were staying was an olive oil mill, and I went there, and I was the only person there. She took me into the back room, showed me the whole setup, how it's processed, how it's ground, all of that stuff. And then she said, "Do you want to taste some?" And I said, "Sure." And she let me taste what they call their original or their traditional, which is a black olive oil. And it tasted delicious, but like what I know. And then she let me taste the green olive oil. And I didn't realize that people don't press both of them. And the green olive oil was spicy. It was really different. It was, it almost burnt your throat a little bit swallowing it. Not like hot spicy, but very different flavor to the black olive oil. So I got a little container of that and a container of the black so I could bring that back and have everybody try it. It was really cool. But yeah, so clary sage was everywhere. There was one other plant. I can't remember, but it was just everywhere. Like, naturally grew all over the place, which was really, really neat. Especially since those plants I've always had such an interest in. It was nice to see them in an environment where they just thrived. So let's see. Gosh, we did so much while we were there. So another thing that we did on one of the last days is we went to the larger city of Arles. And Arles has its own Colosseum, which is really cool. I'd never heard of any other Colosseums, and I'm sure they're all over the place because the Romans were all over the place, but it was neat to see a Colosseum outside of Rome. We toured around the Colosseum and then went to the Van Gogh Museum and saw all kinds of amazing artwork. But it was towards the end of the trip, and the kids were just tired. Tired because they were off their schedules, tired because there'd been, very little downtime where they could be by themselves. It's a group of fairly introverted kids. And so while we were sitting down for lunch, Kaya and another girl were kind of complaining back and forth. They were just, when you haven't had a chance to get your energy back, it's easy to fall into that mode of just complaining about things. So there was a lot of smoke in France and Italy. People don't smoke as much here anymore, but it seems like there was still a lot of smoking going on. And Kaya's really sensitive to cigarette smoke, so she was starting to not feel great at lunch. So once we finished eating, I suggested that she and I just go off and walk, and then we'd meet back up with the group at the museum, at the Van Gogh Museum. And so we just got up and started walking, and I have, a podcast watcher who had contacted me and said she lived in Arles. So I thought, oh, it would be awesome. Or she had an ice cream and gelato shop in Arles. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if she were close? And I plugged in her details, and she was 2 streets over. So Kaya and I walked over to Solilais, I think is what it's called, that is owned by Meritje. I have a hard time pronouncing her name. But what a beautiful woman. I walked in, she gave me a huge hug, she gave us amazing gelato, and it was on this perfect corner where there was shade and quiet, and Kaya could just chill for a second. It was really, really nice. And she also gave me yarn. So this is the only yarn I have from my whole trip, and it is totally local. Look at this. She had it all packed up and ready for me. It was so sweet. So this dark one, I'm going to not get these names right, but I'll do my best. She said it's the Burrell color and the Tarasconnais breed, which I'd never heard of before, from southwest France and the Pyrenees. And it's super yummy. And then the second one is Grige, and it's a mix of Roux de Roussillon with Bizet and Charmois breeds. I will have those all in the notes. But I love them. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. It's going to have to be something special. But I thought it was so sweet. Thank you so much for giving me these and for thinking of me, and they're extremely special yarn. So I really appreciate it. I thought it was interesting also, I consider myself fairly well versed in sheep breeds. I'd never heard of any of these. So it cut me down a level and made me realize I really don't know that much about sheep. It was 4 different breeds from France. I had never heard of any of them. So I need to do a little research and see what they're like. Thank you, Meritje. So after the France trip was over and everybody headed their separate ways, pretty much every kid whose parent came also had an idea of somewhere else they wanted to go. One family went to London, another one went to Switzerland, another one went to Paris. Kaya and I flew over to Rome and met up with Toby and Leaf because we've been trying to get to Italy, Toby and I, for 15 years. We were actually taking an Italian class when we discovered we were pregnant with Kaya and ended up deciding not to go to Italy because too many other things. We redid our house, we got married, all this other stuff happened during the time when we thought we might go before we had her. So knowing that Kaya and I were going to be in France anyway, it just made sense to have the two of them fly over and have our family trip. So we went to Rome, and it was overwhelming, especially coming from the countryside of France. Rome is absolutely steeped with history, so much stuff there, but there's also a lot of people, and it was very crowded, it was very hot, and I was kind of surprised how dirty the city was. I mean, it's a really big city. It's hard not to have trash on the streets of a really big city, but it grew on me, definitely. At first I was like, oh, I don't know if I like it here, but I think I was feeling overwhelmed because I'd just been in super quiet, and I usually live in a pretty quiet area. So it was amazing. The more we explored, the more I wanted to see. We got to see of course, the standard things that a tourist goes to see, the Colosseum and the Parthenon, or the Pantheon, and the Roman Forum, and all kinds of amazing things. Leaf, unfortunately, as soon as we got over there, got sick for a couple of days, and so we switched on and off. Toby and Kaya went to go see some really old catacombs, which he absolutely loved. Toby said it was probably one of his favorite things, but I stayed home with Leaf and got to see pictures. But then the next day for Kaya's birthday, the big thing on the trip was going to be taking her to Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius. And Toby and Leaf couldn't go because Leaf really was feeling rough. And we tried. We thought maybe he could make it through, but I'm glad we didn't push it because it was a big hike to the top of the volcano. It was a lot of walking around in the sun. In Pompeii, it was a very long day, but it was amazing. Kaya and I had a blast. You walk up the side, the top last part of Mount Vesuvius, and you get to see all of Naples. And we got to hear the story of the big eruption and why nobody ever dug up Herculaneum in Pompeii, because, at the time the people believed the gods thought those cities were cursed, and so they didn't want to have anything to do with them, and that's why they left them there for hundreds of years before someone really discovered that they were there, and that it's still considered a dangerous volcano, and that they're expecting the next eruption to be a pretty major one. The only reason why Naples wasn't covered, because it's right below the mountain, is because of the way the wind blew. It blew the lava. The lava went towards Herculaneum, and the ash covered Pompeii. And that it was just circumstance. So it was pretty neat. It was really cool to see. They haven't even excavated all of Pompeii. There were places, there was a new room, a new large villa that had been opened up just this past December that we got to see, that had amazing mosaics, beautiful, beautiful patterns on the floors and on the walls. And she talked about how the person who lived here probably would have been fairly prominent. Pompeii itself was a market city, so usually it was open during the business time, and the wealthy people lived elsewhere. But some people lived in town, but they wouldn't live on the main street. The main streets had ruts where the wagons would go, and there were big boulders every so often for people to walk on, because all the poop and all the mess was dumped into the streets, and then the slaves would wash the streets every day. But you didn't want to walk in it, so you'd cross the street at these specific spots where you could step on these boulders. But the residential streets of the rich people weren't, the donkeys didn't go down those streets. So those had no ruts in them from the wheels. They were all fairly even. And we got to see the places where they would probably have made wine, certain different types of market stores, as well as a brothel. Prostitution was legal then, and there were pictures and drawings, paintings on the walls of different positions and things that you could get while you were there. So you'd be in the waiting room basically and look around, and that's what I want, and be taken back to your room and your stone bed. And there were even at different points in the area in around the brothel, especially coming up from the harbor, because people would come in from the harbor. Sailors and vendors and stuff would come in from the harbor. There were signs pointing towards the brothel, but the signs were basically carved penises. It was a carved shape, just like you would have drawn in the second grade or the fourth grade. That standard little shape that thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, they drew the same thing. They just carved it into the stone and pointed in the direction of the brothel. I just thought that was hysterical. So yeah, it was really amazing. We had a traditional pizza. They talked about the old style pizza and how pizza used to be basically just flatbread, because people who didn't have a lot, it was easy to gather your grain and just make a flat bread, and then you could put things on it. You could put vegetables or sauces or whatever on it, and that's how you would eat cheaply. So there were, just like pita bread, there was a flatbread of Italy. And then when tomatoes were introduced from the Americas to Italy, they started making a red sauce and putting some cheese on top. And that was the original, what was thought of as the original style pizza, just a red sauce and cheese. And then when, let's see, there were 3 different varieties. Oh, I think one was just a white sauce, which was just basically cheese on the white bread. But when Queen Marguerite came to Naples, I don't remember the years, there was a man who was a baker who wanted to honor her, and he added basil to it and said, here's the 3 colors of the Italian flag on a pizza, and I'm calling it the Margherita pizza. And it was red sauce, cheese, and basil. And so that was another traditional pizza. So we had a choice between the 3 different pizzas, and were able to have that for lunch, and it was delicious. So other things, we did so many things, and I know this is going to take a huge long episode, so I'm trying to talk about some of the things that just come to mind as the most memorable, and I'm going to have lots of pictures at the end for you guys to watch if you want to. After Rome, and we explored lots around there, but after, we took a train up to a small town called Orvieto. It's about an hour and a half north of Rome in Umbria, and it's considered, the green area of Italy, which there's lots of green around Italy, but that area calls themselves the super green area. And Orvieto is a town that, so this area, millions of years ago, was covered by volcanic lava. Big eruption, lots of lava, covered up. Then at this area at some point was ocean. And, over many years, millions of years, it changed. But what was left was kind of this mountain, and, in other areas also, these little mountains of volcanic lava that had not washed away from the ocean or been worn down by time and weather. And the Etruscans, 2,500, 2,600 years ago, created this into a walled city, right? So they built a way up this lava mountain and walled it off and built their city inside. It was defendable. You could see what was happening in the valleys below. And because the lava rock is like sponge, it's so porous, the rain would just go right through it and then hit the clay level below and stay there. So to get water, they dug these wells deep down into the lava, the old rock. Tufa is what it's called. And they were skinny little wells with these notches on each side so that they could basically crawl up hand and foot all the way down and all the way back up. But the thing that still isn't known is, how did they do that? Because they were so far down, they would have problems breathing. Like, exchange of oxygen wasn't happening. So someone suggested, well, maybe they used big bellows and were able to blow the oxygen down for the person going down the well to gather the water. But then if they did that, they'd have no light, because they'd need some kind of a torch, which would then use up the oxygen that isn't down there. And if they blew the bellows, it blows the light out. So it's still unknown exactly how they were able to climb down, gather the water, and then climb back up without the oxygen. So that was really cool to see. After, I think it was around 200s BC, the Romans kind of took over this city. It became a Roman populated city, and they kicked the Etruscans out and actually sent them elsewhere. And they populated the city so much that they couldn't grow anymore, right? They grew up and out as much as they could. So then they started growing down. And as they were digging down, that they would use this idea of the wells and dug workspace. So there are tunnels and caverns under the whole city. And it's not a big city. I mean, it's only a couple of miles across, if that. You can walk from one end to the other in maybe 30 minutes. And they dug into this volcanic rock and created pottery studios. We saw that. We saw oil mills. We saw wineries. We saw dovecotes where they would raise pigeons for food. And they just made this whole city underground. Not only was the walled city then defendable, but then they had access to water and food if there was ever a problem, because they had the doves that they were growing, they had all the storage or that they were raising, they had all this storage for olives and wine and stuff like that. And apparently they have found, like, there were only, that I know of, 2 public, places that were open for the public to see. We went to one that was a privately owned tunnel that was a big pottery studio, basically. And you can go in. It was called Pozzo della Cava, and pozzo meaning well, because there's a big well you can see in this place. And we went in and looked around and saw the old pottery shards that they found, and were able to explore that, which was really cool. And then there was another one that was open to the public that showed a lot of the old dovecotes that were open to the south side, where the doves could, the pigeons actually, they were raising them, had all these notches in the wall for making nests. They'd go out for food. They'd come back to lay their eggs. So many people, especially wealthy people, would have these underneath their homes. So they'd go down into the basement, they'd grab themselves a dove or or a pigeon or some eggs and head back upstairs. But the pigeons took care of themselves. They fed themselves. This was just a place for them to roost. So apparently they have discovered at least 1,200 separate entrances. Almost every house in this town has their own little entrance beneath it to their own caverns and caves. It was crazy. Toby and I actually looked at real estate thinking, maybe we could get something with a cave. Wouldn't that be cool? Not that we would actually move over there, but like, how cool would that be to have your own bat cave downstairs? It's really neat. We went to 2 different restaurants. One restaurant that had actually the seating area in the caves. You go in the front door and you walk straight down the stairs and you're in old caverns. One of these was the one that we sat in was a rope maker's cavern. They had old materials and work tools that showed he was a rope maker, whoever lived in the space. And then another one that we went into, it's called, I think it was just Pozzo Utrusco. And it said on the sign, our patrons are welcome to see the well. But it's not anywhere that you can tell, because you walk, everything's on street level and you don't go below to eat. So I asked about it and he said, you want to see the well? And I said, yeah. So he walked us into the restaurant and then to the back kitchen area and said, wait just a second. Went through the door. I heard them moving and shuffling some things around and said, okay, you can come in. And you actually go in through the kitchen and in a side door and then down. And when you go down into this old cavern, it's their whole wine stores. They've got all, because it's perfect temperature. It's cool. It's just the right humidity. They had wine all over. And then you just keep walking down these stairs to see this really old well. It was so cool. So we had a blast exploring that city. For me, just knowing that there were tunnels of all sorts dug underneath me was really cool. But part of the reason why this city still exists and all those tunnels still exist, because over time, weather wears away at the edges and the city starts falling in on itself. On one of the tours, one of the women spoke about a neighboring city that was becoming abandoned because it was falling in on itself. There were too many caves dug, too many things started collapsing, and over time the weather was, shards of the edge of the mountain would start falling off. And it was, at some point just not going to be there anymore. But Orvieto wasn't like that, and it had a massive reconstruction and saving in the 90s. She said millions of dollars were brought in from all around Europe to help save this city. where they would, infuse concrete into the cracks and make sure that everything was stable. And there's, for many years, not just since the 90s, but for hundreds of years, it sounds like there have been regulations as to how much you can dig and how far apart columns need to be to help keep the city up so that it doesn't collapse in on itself. Because if you're digging down and taking out the rock and taking out the tufa rock to make bricks for the house above, at some point things are just going to fall in. So they made regulations about it so things would be architecturally stable. But the biggest thing in Orvieto is the Duomo. It has what is considered the best example of Italian Gothic architecture and mosaic that I know of. As far as I know, it's like the one in the world. It has a massive old basilica that is striped inside and out with two different types of rock, which is very cool. But the whole front of it, massive facade, the whole thing is done in mosaics. And I'm talking tiny, tiny pieces of tile, picture after picture and carving after carving throughout these pictures, related to events, historical events and events of the Bible and stuff like that. It was gorgeous. And because of that, the locals think the city has been saved. It was considered an open city during the World Wars so that it shouldn't be bombed. An open city were cities that were considered historically sacred and they shouldn't be bombed. But Rome was considered an open city and it was bombed a bunch. But for some reason, Orvieto wasn't. So a lot of that history was preserved. Orvieto was also the place where when there was revolts or strife going on in Rome, the Pope, if he was in danger, was able to move to a castle called the Castle St. Angles, which is just outside of the Vatican, but it's still in Rome. If he didn't feel safe there, he could go to Orvieto, and Orvieto was a refuge area. And so I think it was in the 1500s, Pope Clement VII, I believe, had a massive well dug to make sure that they had access to water if there was ever a siege. And the well was dug in Orvieto with two spiraling helix staircases, basically. So the donkey, the people, the baskets to gather the water could go down one staircase and then back up another one. So there was never a traffic jam. If another person was coming down, you wouldn't meet them and then not be able to get back up. So we walked down the whole thing and then back up. They call it St. Patrick's Well because of the story of St. Patrick and the well in Ireland, but it really has nothing to do with him except that it's a big well. But it was really cool to see how that was created, and somewhat creepy when you walk down and there's these big open windows where you can look down and the wall protecting you from falling is really no taller than your knees. So that was another thing we saw. The Duomo and St. Patrick's Well and all those things, they feel like have saved this city from being bombed or falling apart or any of that. So again, really cool. I'm sure there are other things to tell you about from all of these adventures, but that's all I can remember right now. And like I said, we came home less than a week ago. It was about 5 days ago, and I'm still trying to catch up. So next week, I'm hoping to do lots and lots of eco printing, and I'll show you lots of pictures of that. I want to do a lot of dyeing to get ready for fall classes and the Not Going to Rhinebeck release and all that stuff. I'm definitely going to be doing some silks for the Not Going to Rhinebeck release because I really enjoy doing those. I like the way the silk takes the color as opposed to the wool. The wool is beautiful too, but the silks just shine with the color. And I also like that it's something you can wear immediately and you don't take it apart. So I may start doing more silks, and we'll see how those go. I may also do some cards, some paper. I'm not sure how much time I'll have. We'll see. But if there's any colors in particular that you're looking to see, I'm trying to experiment with more since I have so much growing right now. I can pull out some more colors than what I was able to get from the winter. So if there's anything in particular that you're wanting to see, I know a few people have mentioned greens. Greens are a little bit hard. Well, no, greens are pretty easy. Those deep emerald greens that come out with indigo are a little bit hard to do with the eco printing because of how I would have to steam the vatted indigo or steam the Saxon indigo, which doesn't steam well. Often it disappears with the heat. Like, it looks vibrant blue and then I take it out and unwrap it and it's just gone. So I'm working on that. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get those emerald greens, but I'll definitely have some pretty natural greens. But if there's any other colors you're looking for, let me know. And I think that's it. I think that's it. I hope you guys have had an amazing month. If there's anything you want to share that you've been up to that you're excited about, please let me know in the comments below or in the Ravelry group, wherever. I'd love to hear what you guys have been up to. And I hope you guys have a great next couple of weeks. I'll probably see you sometime mid-July. Take care.
So this we do how this it's like essentiel. So when the product arrive in essentiel, it's a mix like that. Mix between floral water, hydrolate, or essential oil.